and again, welcome. Welcome to My Europe Direct. We are having a really nice webinar this evening, an interactive digital series of event, and we will discover Europe together. Today we will discover Romania with Radu, through the eyes of Radu. And yes, I can quickly introduce myself. I'm Carlotta, I'm 20 years old, and I'm from Cologne in Germany. And yeah, so young people from Europe tell us about their home countries and what they're passionate about. And this is our last event before we do a little summer break, so we can all go on holiday and get back tanned and relax for our next event in August, on the 25th of August, where we will get to meet Spain or Portugal. Not sure yet, but if you follow us on Instagram or on Facebook, you will see, and you can note it in your calendars already. So yeah, first of all, a really big thanks to the following organizations, like for example, EG or the Charlemagne Prize, for yeah, making this event possible, and of course to all the participants. And let's have a good evening. The event is interactive. When you look down, there's a little Zoom section. Probably the most of you have already experienced it through webinars or university meetings and all that stuff. There's the raise your digital hand function. You can do that if you want to discuss your point with Radu, which we would really like. Just a little reminder, if you want to do that, the event is recorded, so you will be live, and we will put it on YouTube afterwards, so your voice will be on YouTube as well. If this is a problem for you, you could also type in your questions via the Q&A function, which is also down there. And yeah, I will just pick up your question and yeah, tell it to Radu then. After the event, we will meet in the virtual meetup room called Gathertown, which is really cool. You can create a little avatar and just walk around and meet people, like for example, Radu and me. If you have further questions, you can ask them there. Or if you just want to get ready for the football game afterwards, you can have the first beer or also the first lemonade. So enough information about the event. Now we come to our guest, Radu. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, I hope not, but when I think of Romania, the first thing that comes to my mind is Dracula, and Radu is here to change it today. He is living in Bucharest, the capital town of Romania, and he is pursuing his doctoral degree there in political science, which I studied too, by the way. And he's funded by the Charlemagne Prize Academy for his research project on shorter supply chains and how they could strengthen Europe's economy. If this sounds a little bit strange to you, it doesn't matter. Radu is going to tell us all about it in a bit, and you can always put your questions there if you don't really understand what supply chains mean, for example, or all the other economy words. That's not a problem. He's only 25 years old, and he has done a lot of things for his age. Like, for example, worked as an editor-in-chief, so a really high position in journalism, of a web magazine in Brussels, and as he worked there, he has also been nominated for the European Press Prize as one of the youngest nominees ever. So really cool. Make sure to read that article. And just a little reminder before Radu is going to talk, you can raise your hand or type in your questions. And now Radu is going to tell us something about Romania. After that, you can vote for some other topics that he has prepared, like, for example, minorities in Romania, or how the EU has, like which impact the EU has on Romania. So really interesting things. And now I'm going to stop the presentation so Radu can share his. And yeah, the stage is yours, Radu, in a bit.
Thank you so much, Carlotta. It's always surreal when someone else introduces you or lists the things you have done. And I appreciate how you did it very much. I'm glad to be here with you and to be able to talk about my country and Europe. And I hopefully will be able to be entertaining enough to compare with the football game that is close to starting, if I understand correctly.
I'm sure you will be, I'm sure.
So, as I'm sure some of you already thought about, and as Carlotta already said, when you think about Romania, you think about Dracula. You think about vampires, you think about very dark castles and situations that aren't very safe in that fantastical kind of way. Romania did serve as the inspiration for that. Aside from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, the character itself is inspired by this medieval lord in Romania, Vlad Țepeș, who was known for being especially bloodthirsty. Not that he actually drank blood, but he was ruthless. And I posted here some of the most famous things about Romania, which you might have heard of, to start you off with a familiar ground. So this is the House of the People, built under communism. It's the heaviest building on Earth, and it's comparable in size to the Pentagon. So you can actually see it from space. Um, its building was economically heavy on Romania in the 80s and 70s, in the 80s especially, but right now it serves as the seat of parliament for Romania. And this is the Bran Castle, which is Dracula's castle, if you will. It's a very popular touristic spot, and you can visit it if you like. That's the start of the presentation. A bit about Romania's history, just so you can place it in your mind geographically and historically. Basically, Romania is formed by the union of three kingdoms. So you have the southern part, roughly separated by the Carpathian Mountains. You have Moldova in the east and Transylvania in the west. Each of these came under the influence of a certain empire during history. So you have in the west, you have the Austro-Hungarian influence, in the east, you have Russian influence, and in the south, you have the Ottoman Empire and its influence. So the interplay of these forces, the regional interplay, also shaped Romania. And you can see it in language, you can see it in institutions, in the clothes that Romanians used to wear. They were very oriental, if you will. But with the union, after the First World War, with the union of Romania, you have the country itself that we come to know as Romania in modern times. Also, Romania was shaped, as many of the countries in the region, by these wars, by the First and Second World War. So if we have Great Romania after the First World War, we also have a lesser Romania without Moldova after the Second World War, when the country was occupied by the Soviet troops, turned into a republic by force, and was under Soviet rule or influence until 1989, when the Iron Curtain came down. And Ceausescu, the dictator in communist times, was overthrown. Then we have Romania in the 90s, which was subjected to terrible inflation. And it was this time of economic and democratic uncertainty. But even during those times, and ever since 1989, the hope of Romanians was to join the Western world, to be part of that kind of setting. And we have Romania, who joined the NATO organization in 2004 and became member of the EU in 2007. So aside from Croatia, Romania and Bulgaria in 2007 are the newest members of the EU. I also included formal kind of part at the end, the political science student that I am, which is to tell you that it is a semi-presidential republic. So we have a president and a prime minister, and they share executive power. This is a feature somewhat of former communist states. And in the literature, it is ambivalent about this kind of setting. So that's basically what Romania is about. I can tell you it has also between 18 and 19 million inhabitants. And you can see the map very clearly. That's the basic info about Romania. I also have some fun facts for you before we get into the heart of it. Just to not leave you with the cut and dry geographical kind of info, I can tell you that Romania is the home of brown bears in Europe. So we have about 60% of Europe's brown bears. about 6,000 bears, which sometimes is it's a dangerous for inhabitants in the local regions, because bears become hungry and come down into villages. And although they rarely attack or kill anyone, it is a dangerous situation. We also have this world famous road in the Carpathian Mountains called the Transfagarasan, which is it's carved into the mountain, as you can see. It's a favorite of the cast of Top Gear, the famous drivers. Originally, it was built after the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia by Soviet troops. So Ceausescu, when he saw that, he realized that he needed a quick way to move troops across the mountains. So he built this road, and now it's for our pleasure to enjoy when we drive. Um, Romania was also the setting for the movie Borat, the beginnings. Um, which was a shocking thing for me when I saw it first in 2006. I was not used to seeing Romania being portrayed even in any way in movies that were shown in Hollywood or made by Hollywood. And the famous actor Sacha Baron Cohen went there and filmed his village, if you will, and that was the village of the character. And that happened again in the most recent movie as well. Uh, we also have the former Dacian king Decebal carved in stone, akin to the Rushmore Mountain in the US, if you will. So you can find this along the Danube in the city of Orshova, somewhere around there. And it's a beautiful sight. You don't really expect it when you travel there. Finally, the fun fact for me as well. If you didn't know this, the Romanian language is the only Latin language spoken in Eastern Europe. So it's a Romance language. It has elements of Russian, it has elements of Turkish even, a lot of synonyms you can find with these languages, but the predominant part comes from Latin, Vulgar Latin. So you can really find similarities between Romanian and Spanish and Italian and even French. But we also have da, which is Russian for yes. It's also Romanian for yes. So that throws people off when you try to identify Romanian and you're abroad. And the final fun fact is that we have a Mary cemetery. So that might sound weird that you would be married in a cemetery, but the inhabitants of Maramureș County in northern Romania have this cemetery that is old, and instead of being a usual place of mourning, if you will, it is this very brightly colored place with scenes of the people's lives put on the crosses. And it has become a tourist attraction as well, because it's so unique. Yes, so this was my short introduction, the fun one, believe it or not, before we get into the cut and dry of it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Radu. First question it came to my mind. Do you have beaches?
Yes. Famously, we have a beach. It's along the Black Sea.
Yeah.
In eastern Romania. So it's competing with the Bulgarian seaside and the Turkish seaside, and lots of European tourists do go there to enjoy.
So is it nice for tourists as well? Because when I'm thinking of Romania, I'm of course thinking of beautiful nature and the road you just showed and many cultural things to visit as well as a tourist, but some beaches would be nice as well. So if you can also tell me that there are nice beaches, maybe it will be my next holiday destination.
In that sense, Romania is fortunate because about a third of it is mountains, as you said. Another third of it is valleys, and a third of it, the last third of it is flat land. And also we have access to the seaside. So geographically, Romania is very fortunate. And the same access to the seaside gives us some access to oil, for example.
Yeah.
So it's geographically, it's very important, an ideal location, if you would.
Right, perfect. Okay, so maybe you can just leave my presentation on, but before we go to your hard topic, I will start the vote. You can vote on the following, hope you can see it, and make sure to vote for, say, 3 at least of them, and just what you think is most interesting. I'm gonna give you half a minute, and I'm really curious to see what you like best, because I already have my favorites, but I can't vote. So yeah, great. Just gonna give you half a minute, and then we'll start with Radu's hard topic. Okay, so clear, pretty clear already.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
Can you
very
see it too,
excited.
Radu?
Sorry?
Can you see it too? Then we have
Yes, I can. I cannot vote. I still see it, but I minimized. Yes.
Great. Okay. Few people are still watching it, so
I have slides for every topic, so be not afraid. I have everything covered.
yeah.
And
Okay,
we'll
so
go.
80% voted, it says. That's great. Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna stop it and share the results. You should now see them. Great.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not that clear, but pretty clear. You will definitely talk about Romania and the EU, which I like best as well, and rule of law, which was your favorite topic, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we're all, great that you also voted for minority issues. I like that topic a lot. Really interesting, and also the migration from to Romania. Okay, so you start with your favorite topic, manufacturing, and after that we can just go on to the next one, even though you still have time to put some questions, but you could also raise your hand to ask something or discuss something whenever you want. I will then interrupt Radu, and you have the time. Okay, so I'll stop it and you can go on.
I see that the pandemic in Romania was not very popular, which is understandable that we have all this information about the pandemic in every which way.
Yeah.
So I know people are hungry about getting information about manufacturing and supply lines in Europe. I know there is a demand for this. So I'm going to be interesting, I hope, when I talk about it. Basically, it's my project for the Charlemagne Prize Foundation, Prize Academy, which I want to thank with this occasion. I wrote it, I think last summer or more than a year ago, when the pandemic was still raging on. And even back then, we had a number of analyses and reports that said that beyond the obvious healthcare impact of the pandemic, global impact, we also have an economic impact. And its effects are not immediately obvious. Aside from the people out of work and businesses closing and just people staying inside, there are longer term impacts. And this is one of them. My argument is that supply chains for European companies should be shortened to become more resilient. If you listen to European leaders in the past months, you would hear something similar. It has increasingly become a topic of concern in these circles because it's such an obvious impact by now. So basically, just to get it out of the way, a supply chain is this totality of operations that happens between making a product and putting it on the shelf. So from manufacturing, from gathering the primary products to manufacturing it, to transporting it, and then to putting it on the shelves. And it's a process that we don't really think about most of the time, but it's vital to our way of life right now. And what happened during the pandemic initially was that the pandemic shut down factories, obviously, and it also, the fact that it shut down factories in China initially also impacted production in Europe and in the US and other countries, other parts of the world. You can see here that some of the most vulnerable goods were microelectronics. That means semiconductors, which go into PlayStations, for example, or phones or even cars. And you cannot have a functioning new car or a PlayStation without such parts. And they were produced and still are produced predominantly in Asia. And as those factories closed down first, it sent a disruption along the entire supply chain. Also, electric car batteries and AI technology, among others. So these things that are made predominantly in one part of the world were missing. Even parts of it were missing. You might ask, well, how does that impact Europe? Just because products that are made there do not reach shops in Europe, it's not really a problem. More immediate problem would be the loss of life, of course, but also as the pandemic is slowly wrapping up, hopefully, these are also problems that we have to talk about. And especially since so many European companies and Western companies have their manufacturing and production capabilities set in China, for example, which is the origin of this pandemic, and in Wuhan, which is an important business center as well. This happened long time ago, decades ago, before I was born or Carlotta was born, when China liberalized in the 80s, starting with the 80s and then the 90s, most obviously, when it started to welcome foreign capital. And it offered very favorable conditions. And Western firms, seeing the fact that they could produce at lower costs in China and then sell in other parts of the world, they jumped at the opportunity. This is the offshoring that we often hear about. This is how this is something that you hear about in the discourse of Donald Trump and other politicians, not necessarily politicians that you would brand as populists, but and this impacts politics and economy. So what happened is that factories closed down, products were missing, and the entire supply chain was affected. And this was especially a sensitive situation due to manufacturing being offshored to such countries. My argument is that Western firms or firms in general, but especially European companies, can move their production capabilities in Central and Eastern Europe and still produce at prices that are globally competitive. That means that you close the distance between producer and market, but you also enjoy lower costs. So why did these companies offshore their factories? Why did they ship off their factories initially? It is because the rising wages in the West were making it impossible to make it to produce competitively. Just a second. Right. So that's where reshoring comes in. That's where we convince people to move back their factories and their production capabilities into Central and Eastern Europe. And there's lots of reasons to do that. So, for example, when you have factories that are far abroad, that are very different and far away from the market they are supplying, you have this this mismatch between producer and market. We have studies that have shown that products when they are made abroad, when they are offshored, they are not up to standard lots of times. They have defects in a higher degree than it is in when they are produced somewhere near, and this puts a strain on the supply chains because it has to go back. It has to impose. The producer has to impose some measures and standards, and it makes producing not that cheap. It puts a strain on the company that offshored in the first place. And this is something that you don't usually think about, but you are paying the price for it because it shows into the final price. The fact that one good is produced more expensively, it costs more to produce something, it also becomes visible in the final price. So that's something that we should all care about. The fact that companies can produce at a better price. And I'm arguing that they can do that in the
Just a quick second. I think someone is actually having their microphone off. Maybe you can turn it off so that we can listen to Radu. And Radu, just a little question. Can you put the PowerPoint presentation on full presentation modus as well?
sure.
I think that we can read the what you wrote down there even better. There must be a little something like slideshow or maybe something like that.
1 second.
Yeah, great. And I think the one that was loud muted. Thank you.
Right. This is how you do it. So what I'm arguing is that these businesses should reshore, should bring their factories closer to Europe. For example, if you sell vacuum cleaners, mainly in Germany or in Spain or in France, it makes sense for you to produce them in Poland or Romania or Bulgaria. Even though you might pay a higher price in some situations compared to traditional manufacturing centers like China, overall, over time, it just makes sense. It makes economic sense. It adds resilience to your supply chain, and it builds some kind of relationship that is closer to the consumer. So this is proximity manufacturing, which, opposed to offshore manufacturing, offers its own benefits. So you have shorter lead times, which means shorter times between producing a good and putting it actually on the shelf. It doesn't have to be on a boat for 3 months. You can just ship it very fast. For that, you actually need infrastructure, which is a problem in many countries of Eastern Europe, Romania included. But you also have, and there are studies that have shown this, you have higher product quality and innovation and other benefits. So for European manufacturers, as you see there, it's cost efficient to produce in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is the cut and dry of it. And why should you? Why should you bring your business to Central and Eastern Europe? Well, you have a lower tax compared to richer countries, compared to the worldwide average, even compared to China. So aggregated, the taxes and made into an average, the taxes in Central and Eastern Europe are lower than in many other countries. And here I propose like a regional tax that would benefit the region as a whole and the union as a whole. So aside from things that we usually hear about sustainability and bringing the producer closer to the consumer, my project somehow addresses the producer directly and argues that aside from any values or corporate identity that you might profess, it just makes economic sense to do this. So aside from taxes, the wages that you would have to pay right now, even though they are increasing, the wages that you would have to pay in the Central and Eastern Europe are much lower than in other countries of the European Union, even though they are higher than those in China. So in manufacturing, as you see here, in Central and Eastern Europe, you pay an average of $17.50 an hour for an employee manufacturing, whereas in countries like in Germany or France or Spain, you pay close to $40. So that's why the argument is to nearshore, not reshore. So don't because that might be difficult for you to do as a producer. Don't bring your factory back to where it's most expensive. Bring it to somewhere which is still offering you economic conditions that are favorable. And China has a history of attracting investments by offering such conditions. And in my project, I also argue a series of measures in a policy paper that Central and Eastern European countries should offer to also attract foreign investments.
Maybe I can interrupt you there because someone is actually asking something in the chat. Thank you for that question. He or she is asking, do cheaper production costs through shorter supply chains only apply products that are not only produced by European companies, but that are also only mainly used in Europe?
No, it's not only something that you can apply to European companies or just to Europe. If you're in the US and you're a company that sells to the US, it makes sense to produce, say, in Mexico or in Brazil, rather than in, let's say, China or even Romania in that situation. It just makes sense because the supply chain is shorter and it takes much less for you to get product A to shelf B. Uh, I'm I'm primarily addressing European companies in this project for a number of reasons, but this can be applied. This is a principle of shorter supply chains, enhancing resilience that can be applied anywhere, frankly. And you see this, you have seen this in the pandemic, especially with products such as masks. When masks were in short supply and there was a high demand of masks because we literally knew that masks could save our lives by preventing contagion, at least in Romania, but I think across the European Union, it was the production of masks, the domestic production of masks was encouraged. Well, I'm arguing that aside from these life-saving protection equipment products that we've seen and used in the pandemic, we can apply the same principle with less urgency, of course, to these products, to semiconductors, to car batteries, to AI technology, to a number of goods that, even though are not immediately obviously strategic in their uses, are still important, are still something that we have to have every day almost. You can say that toilet paper is of strategic importance to Europe, and somehow build a supply chain strategy based on that. It sounds funny, but uh, it's still important to the economy. Every single product that we don't have is more expensive, and it's harder to find. Shortages have taught us that. And what I did, this is the this is the part of the project that I'm especially proud of, was that I basically went and looked in the field. I wanted to go beyond the theory and just see see what I could find in the field, in the stores. So I created a database of products, products made by European companies, European brands, one of them made in China and one of them made in Central and Eastern Europe. And I made it so they were comparable products. So they would be used for the same things, roughly, because you cannot find two products that are exactly the same. So here in this example, you have tires. And I chose tires made by Continental, which is a German company, and Pirelli, which is an Italian company. And I put them head to head. One of the Pirelli tire being made in China and the Continental tire being made in Germany. Just a quick side note, these companies are huge economic actors and they produce all over the world. So it's not just that Pirelli produces only in China and Continental only in Romania or Central and Eastern Europe. It's just an example of in this situation. And I listed the factories in every country, and I put some company history and additional information. But mostly, I wanted to look at the prices. And what you see here is telling for the trend. So I found basically that in 6 of the 10 cases, the European product was more expensive than the Chinese-made one, let's say, even though they are European companies, all of them, but not by much. It was not a huge difference that would rule out competition. And it's, by the way, I didn't look only at tires. I have in the database coffee makers, vacuum cleaners, power tools, things that are not very shiny, are not very glamorous when you think about it, but things that make the economy go round, let's say. And in this situation, in most of them, uh, the company that was present in Central and Eastern Europe continued to invest money in the factories that it had, continued to expand its capabilities, continued to hire more people. Uh, they were also much prouder of their presence and of the time that they had spent in that country, and they were much more ready to tell you that simple fact. Whereas some of them that were producing outside of Europe were not very transparent with the simple country of origin. In itself, that is a powerful marketing tool. Aside from economic and cost benefits, producing in Europe can make you gives you the freedom to tell Europeans proudly that you are making it in that country. This is not an endorsement of economic nationalism or autarky. Of course, Europe cannot shut itself off globally. European companies thrive by being active globally and selling globally. But as a marketing tool, being able to say that you produce locally or regionally or even European wide is a powerful plus for you as a company. Um, and producing in China specifically adds some risks that we will talk about later on. So,
Do you have time for a question?
yes, please.
Okay, cool. Because someone was asking how an equal European minimum wage would influence the nominal labor costs between Central Eastern European countries and countries that are not Central Eastern European.
Yeah, sure. That is a huge topic of interest.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you would ask employers, you would hear that it would make things much more difficult. So, in Central and Eastern Europe and in China as well, wages have been rising. They have been rising because of automation, because you need increasing qualification to produce in manufacturing, whereas the jobs of old that would require brute strength and manpower are not that prevalent anymore, even in China. So in the sector, wages have been rising, and even in the economy in general. That being said, they are very far away um, from the wages in countries that are not in Eastern Europe, as you have seen in this graph, for example. But this is just for the manufacturing sector. So a minimum wage, although it has a good aim, let's say, of rising the quality of life and the retribution, the pay that a worker gets, may affect companies negatively and may affect this strategy of shortening supply chains. So what you do when you raise minimum wages, typically in any economy, is that you put a strain on the employer, and you put a strain on the number of jobs that will be created. So you would have fewer jobs that are higher paying in the case that businesses don't altogether close. So I think we can talk about the minimum wage, but later on, European-wide minimum wage, but later on. Yes. So just to conclude, I hope you had an idea of my project. Basically, I'm arguing that it makes economic sense if you're a company, be it European or American or any kind of company. Chinese companies as well have been doing the same move recently. It just makes sense if Europe is your market, and European Union is a huge market. It makes sense to produce in Central and Eastern Europe, and Central and Eastern European countries that are EU members specifically, because if you produce in Belarus, you will have a very hard time nowadays, let's say.
Links me to a really good point, because it's really interesting. It really is, especially if you're not really into that theme and that topic, and you don't get to wonder what about supply chains in your daily life, because even if my t-shirt is from don't know, H&M or anything, that I just don't have any basic idea where it comes from, apart from when I go to the shop and buy it. And this brings me to the topic of human rights, because we were talking about economy all the time, and especially if you talk about Belarus, for example, how the idea of supply chains could not only bring economical factors and advantages to the EU back, but also when it comes to human rights. And we were talking about minimum wages as well, how important it is for the EU to kind of bring back the idea of human rights, especially through supply chains.
So I have a great example with the idea of human rights and supply chains and economy in general, because you said H&M. So H&M, if I'm not mistaken, is a Swedish brand. They also produce in China, as it happens, because I was very careful to look at these kind of pieces of information of news as I was making the project. And this happened in 2019 or 18, I think 2019, when H&M produced and marketed a shirt that had on its back list of countries and capitals. So you have France and Paris, Germany and Berlin, China, and you get the idea. But it also had Hong Kong and Hong Kong. And it had this idea, what it implied basically in Beijing, what it implied basically is that Hong Kong was a country in its own, which is a very sensible topic in China, as you know. So what happened is that the Chinese government deplatformed H&M. They took it off online stores, making it impossible for H&M to sell its goods, putting pressure on H&M for a purely political topic. You also have companies like Ericsson, that was basically transformed into an advocate for Huawei in front of the Swedish government. Because of the Chinese government's pressure. It might not connect immediately what I'm saying. It might sound like a conspiracy, but Ericsson right now makes 1% of its income comes from Europe, whereas 10% of its income comes from China. And that gives huge leverage for the Chinese government, which acts as a guard of this expanding Chinese market that every company wants access to. It gives it leverage to transform these European companies into pawns, if you will. And of course, you mentioned human rights. It's tricky because European companies and Western companies have to walk this tightrope because if any connection between them and, for example, the work camps in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are being held, and basically forced to work, if any connection is established, that will obviously lead to investigation and condemnation in the West. But if the company acts on that link and refuses to be part anymore of this relationship, then it will catch backlash from the Chinese government and receive the H&M treatment. So it's very dangerous for a company, believe it or not, to activate in China because of this influence of political influence that you just do not see in the European Union. That is one of the benefits of of producing in the European Union. Again, economically, totally makes sense, but you also get this oversight. You get this stabilizing presence of the liberal democratic giant that is the European Union.
Yeah. Just quickly, someone called Eagle raised their hands a few minutes ago. I'm not sure whether we already answered your question, or I can give you speech permission. If I shall do that, maybe you can raise your hand again so I know that you're still there. And what I also wanted to know when we wait for Eagle, it's really interesting how it kind of infects so many things that we don't have in mind, like for example the human rights thing, or what I was also thinking about, the carbon emissions that are not polluting the world when you have to put product A to the shelves in Europe, for example. What it also does for the environment if you put production to Eastern Europe, because the race will be so small in comparison to China.
Shipping a good by sea. So in a huge container ship like the Evergreen ship that we came to know and love, um, is not comparatively it's not very pollutive. But when you talk of the volume, when you talk about the production itself, then you do have some environment concerns. And again, this is more of a reason to produce it internally in the EU, because you have a closer watch on these factories. You can impose regulations and lessen the environmental impact. Also, the distance is it's much shorter. But for that and to maximize this benefit, you need infrastructure, which Romania sadly lacks in this respect. And uh, improving that would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think if we have said everything about the supply chains, which is a really interesting topic, and now I would love to hear something about the part that Romania plays in the EU, or the vice versa, how the EU infects Romania and everything that has to do with the EU entry in 2007.
Sure. So as the audience chose Romania in the EU, I told you basically that Romania joined the EU in 2007. Per its population, it received 32 seats in the European Parliament. I think it had 32 seats, and basically all the European MEPs are in the three big center parties, so the EPP, the SD, and the Renew Europe group. At the moment of accession in 2007, Romania was still showing some cause of worry when it comes to the judiciary. So you have this mechanism that you might have not heard of, but anyone in Romania has heard of it time and time again, which is the cooperation and verification mechanism. We call it MCV in Romania. We just know it, that periodically comes and analyzes the advances made by the country in this field. So this has to do with corruption, especially in the judiciary, and political tampering with the judicial branch of the government. Uh, but in this, the effect of the European Union has been greatly been beneficiary. So as we will talk about a bit later, the fact that the EU simply holds Romania and the Romanian political system and the judiciary to this high standard of liberal democracy and constitutionalism is a huge gain for Romanians, because this is something that we want to achieve, and the EU simply does that for us. So you don't have to vote reformist politician. You can just ask them to follow the guidelines set by the European Union, which they all want to do, because this is a way that they legitimize themselves. It also affected the economy, as you can see. 70% of Romanian imports and exports go to EU countries, so we benefit from the single market enormously. We also received EU funding more than we contributed, much more. You can see the figures there. So for that, Romanians' membership in the EU has been a plus for Romania by any account, even though recently we have had a type of discourse that would argue the contrary, and I will fill you in about that. So as I said, and as you might know, we've had huge protests for a couple of years before the pandemic, thankfully, about corruption. We had a left government that was looking to overhaul the penal code and lessen punishments for corruption and abuse of power. And at that point, you saw 500,000 people in the streets all over Romania, which was the biggest protest since the revolution. And in these protests, I was there. It was winter. I was freezing. I caught the nastiest cold ever, but it was worth it. In these protests, a common sight would be the European flag. So you would see the Romanian flag, of course, but also the European flag, as you can see here. I think this was for Europe Day, this particular event. But when 500,000 people were out, all of this space would be filled. And you would see the EU flag because it's this force, it's this symbol of what Romania wants to be. And simply by showing it at protests, you are reminding the Romanian political system of its failings and of the standards that they promised to live by and failed to. So it's because of this that because of the faith that is for this visibly among most Romanians. So this was the Sibiu summit, I think a year ago, and they were very well received by the population. So they believe that the EU guarded them against the excesses of national governments, politicians. Um, so they see the EU as protecting democracy, as protecting human rights, as protecting the economy, even through its directives and regulations. So whereas you would hear the narrative coming from the UK, for example, that it's the EU is this bureaucratic machine imposing unreasonable standards, Romanians would tell you that you would tell you a much different story. And in the protest, this was again especially visible. You would see huge European flags alongside the Romanian ones, and also messages like this one in English or even in German, asking European leaders to pay attention to Romania, to help Romania in any way possible when it comes to the abuses of the national government and parliament. This is another topic which is going deeper into the same.
Someone's asking a really good question. I've been wondering about that as well.
Sure.
What changed for you as a young boy, as a teenager, when Romania entered the EU? I mean, of course, you have only been, say, 12 or 15. I'm so bad at maths, I cannot. But anyways, also through the next years, to the 2010 years, what changed for you? What made the EU feel alive for you in Romania?
I was 12, yes, but even before the accession, we would learn a lot about the EU. We would learn the members, the history. It was the national curriculum in schools and middle schools and primary schools would reflect that hope to achieve a goal, with the goal, of course, being accession to the EU. So I didn't feel like something strange was happening in 2007. I just felt like it was the natural progression. We wanted to do this because it was so beneficial to us. Even back then, it was obvious. And we did it. And for me, as a young person, I almost do not remember how it was before. I remember growing up in the EU. I remember going abroad with just my ID card and the single market being there, and all of those things, and learning English and French and German and in school, and forgetting the latter two, sadly.
Can you say something in German, Radu?
No, I cannot. I know. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is gonna be silly, but the one thing that I remember, and I hope my German professor in high school does not see this ever, is fricadelle.
That's great.
Fricadelle, which is this
Yeah.
meat thing that we also have in Romania, right?
Yeah. And what is even better is that fricadelle would be kind of the more Rhine word for that, because I live in North Rhine-Westphalia, and that would be the word that we say here. They have some other words in the northern parts of Germany, but you said the right word, so great.
That's
100% for that.
That's the first thing that comes into my mind. Of course, we learn more. Schadenfreude, for example, everyone knows the days of the week and all of that. But sadly, I do not speak German, even though it would advantage me, obviously, even for my job prospects, if you will. But yes, I remember growing up in, if you will, and having all these opportunities. And if you look at my CV, I don't know why would you do that, but if you do, you would see that I traveled and I took as many opportunities as I could. And it's something that my mother used to remind me every time, that you have all of these chances, take them. And the EU has given me that. And now it has given me this amazing prize and the opportunity to talk to you. So it's a win-win.
We have a really good question linking to that, because someone is asking what other European countries can learn from the positive attitude that you and probably most of the people in Romania have towards the EU. Yeah.
I once talked about this with a Romanian member of the European Parliament. I was on the same plane with her, a bunch of them actually, and I was going to Brussels for the first time. The first time I ever left Romania was for Brussels. So it's symbolically that's something that I was proud of and still am. And I told her, if you want to make Romanians and especially the young people more inclined to support the EU, just bring them to Brussels, make them eat the sweets, see the buildings, and hear other languages. And probably traveling is the best antidote against nationalism of any kind.
Yeah.
And the Erasmus program helps that is especially good for that as well. How can you encourage pro-EU sentiment in countries? Well, you can see in the UK, for example, that people started to talk about the EU when they left. So it's this good for us, especially for the young people that we grew up with, but we don't realize it's there most of the time. And it's good to make people realize that. And just by talking about it, and yeah, that's all you need to do for now, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely that. I mean, we do that when we meet this evening. So maybe we can go on to one last topic. The other ones voted for migration to and from Romania, which is a really interesting
Yes.
topic. Yeah, maybe I can just start because we don't have that much time anymore. With a really direct question: would you leave or would you stay?
That is a question that every Romanian gets asked or poses to himself or herself at least once. My parents would tell me growing up that we tried to leave, but we stopped at the border because I grew up on the border with Hungary. My parents being from the south, so they migrated towards Europe but stopped in Romania. Um, for me, if I would leave my country, I definitely would uh, because I would still, this is going to sound corny, but I would still be in my country. I would still be in Romania because there are so many Romanians across Europe.
Oh,
There are, like I put in here,
yeah.
around 3 million Romanians in Europe, which is the highest immigration number, second to Syria, without the civil war, of course. And even in Brussels, I heard Romanian spoken so often, and alongside French, alongside English and German, and that made me feel at home. In my hometown, people speak 50% Romanian, 50% Hungarian. So I feel at home when it's this multicultural kind of thing. And I would leave, but I would not see it as a tragedy for myself or for Romania. I would not see it as a breaking point.
Yeah, you just said that also because when we do Erasmus, for example, we leave to kind of feel home in different places and to kind of not make home just one house, but rather different cities and even different countries.
Exactly. So I was fortunate enough to take part in Erasmus Plus projects, one of them in Germany, and I met people there, and I put faces to countries, if you will. I
Yeah,
met people from Poland, from Portugal, from Spain, and from Italy, and I went past. Right now, no one could convince me that those people wish me or my country harm. You know, that's the kind of antidote that I was given, aside from the COVID vaccine, back then. You know, it was
yeah.
I was vaccinated against nationalism and against xenophobia back then.
Yeah, that's really great, and that's like I said, this is what we also do today, or to whenever we meet young people from all over Europe, whether you do Interrail or whether you do Erasmus, or whether you just travel with your parents to Romania to visit some castles or to finally get to read Dracula in the real setting. Whenever you do something like that, you get to explore different hometowns, in the best case. Um, someone's saying really lovely, that you put a wonderful presentation and is thanking you, um, and I think that's a good step. Maybe you can stop your presentation because I have
Yes.
some information about you. um, Hope it works now. Yeah, so no, it doesn't. I have to start it here because Radu actually wrote a book, and it's really cool. It's called Europa House and Europe House, and it's available on Amazon. And if you want to do what we just talked about, get to know Europe and get to know many hometowns and live the European idea, I think it's a really good start to just buy the book and read it. And on the other side, Radu did not win prizes and all the other great things as well only, but he does some really cool book recommendations on Instagram. So make sure to take a photo of his name. I know it's quite hard to spell, but it's really cool. He does some really good tips. And we also put his name, so his email. If you have any further questions, I'm sure you can message him on either Instagram or Facebook or his mail to ask or to discuss, or if you want to express any feedback. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I can remind you that we meet each other in Town right now after the event. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you for your wonderful questions, really interesting. And of course, thank you, Radu, for yeah, letting us get to know Romania and how you can be so passionate about Europe and manufacturing and all the wonderful things you do.
It was my
And
pleasure. You
yeah,
cannot see it here, but in my living room, I have a huge European flag that's
so
hanging up. So
cute. That's so cute. Yeah, I think we put some up in now that we have the European Championship as well. Um, many people actually did, not only Germany flags, but some European flags as well.
yeah.
And yeah, I think we have the Gavertown link in the chat. So if you want to join, we would be really happy. Thank you for all to all the organizations as well. And yeah, let's meet on Gavertown and have a nice evening, you guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.